Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to explore a really fascinating political thought experiment drawn straight from our source material. I want you to imagine it's July 2026, and Britain has a new Prime Minister, Andy Burnham. But we're not just looking at your standard, everyday change of government here. We're looking at the ultimate hypothetical scenario. What if, instead of just trying to survive the relentless 24/7 news cycle or merely managing his party, this new prime minister actually managed to repair the machinery of the state itself?
Okay, let's dive into this. We're looking at what is perhaps the most dangerous and frankly rare question in modern British politics. What if the new PM actually fixed the system? Our source material sets up a scenario where the person in number 10 does the impossible. Instead of the usual exhausting cycle of grand promises, quick patch-ups, and pointing fingers, they actually make the country work again. It's a terrifying prospect for the political establishment, honestly, because it shifts the entire focus from just managing the daily crisis to fundamentally repairing the state.
Now, the very first thing that changes in this scenario isn't some massive, sweeping policy. It's actually the atmosphere. For years, the public has essentially lived inside what the text calls a mood of managed disappointment. We're all so used to a system that overpromises and completely underdelivers that we've kind of forgotten what genuine confidence even feels like, right? But in this what-if scenario, the very moment the system starts actually working, that national mood shifts dramatically. It brings back this vital sense of public trust way before the grand economic statistics even have a chance to catch up.
So, the absolutely crucial point is figuring out how you actually build that confidence. To really fix the system, you have to go right after what the source identifies as the boring rot. Just look at this list for a second. Planning rules, procurement delays, overlapping authorities, bad incentives, hostile bureaucracy. I mean, it doesn't sound glamorous at all, does it? It literally sounds like endless piles of paperwork, but that is exactly where the real dysfunction lives. A true system-fixing PM stops pretending that politics is only about delivering these soaring campaign speeches and starts treating it like heavy construction, repairing the foundational paperwork to fix the country underneath it. Well, how does that trust begin to rebuild at the ground level? A country doesn't just fall apart in one dramatic Hollywood-style collapse. It erodes through 1,000 tiny daily frustrations. So naturally, the rebuild happens in reverse. Step 1, a passport arrives faster than expected. Step 2, getting a GP appointment suddenly becomes, easy. Step 3, that massive pothole that basically became a local landmark finally gets repaired. When people start noticing these small, functional changes in their everyday lives, it completely reverses that lingering feeling of national decline.
And that beautifully sets us up for phase 2, fixing essential public services.
If you really want to unclog the NHS, you can't just throw catchy slogans at it. The hypothetical fixes here require deep mechanical changes. We're talking about reducing avoidable bottlenecks, simplifying patient pathways, deploying smarter staffing, improving digital coordination, and actually aligning the money with real outcomes. The source points out something absolutely vital here. Patients don't need abstract lectures on healthcare reform. They just need to feel that the system actually notices them again. Getting seen faster and avoiding those endless waiting rooms turns reform from a dry political theory into a life-changing reality. Next up is social care, which is often the most neglected and politically dangerous part of the entire system. But consider the ripple effect here. If you start by truly supporting the vulnerable, you immediately relieve all those families who feel totally trapped by their caregiving burdens. And that, in turn, unclogs hospital beds because patients actually have a safe place to go when they're ready to be discharged. Fixing this hidden machinery does way more than just help one specific sector. It acts like a pillar holding the whole country upright, and it creates this massively positive cascading impact across all other public services. Then we hit housing. The source notes that a lot of people just assume this issue is simply too big to solve, but that assumption is actually part of the problem. A system fixer has to make housing buildable again by cutting right through the maze of local vetoes and those endless planning delays. And why does this matter so much? Because a nation that can't build homes quietly punishes its younger generations and locks wealth into scarcity. By fixing housing, you aren't just stacking more bricks. You are actively restoring mobility, family stability, and fundamental fairness. Now, let's move over to transport, which holds a really strange political power in Britain. Everyone notices the exact second it fails, but we completely underestimate its impact when it actually works. When trains and buses become reliable, it's not just about keeping to a printed schedule. It psychologically and physically connects the regions. People can finally commute without feeling like they're entering some kind of daily punishment ritual. By fixing transport, the PM fundamentally changes how opportunity moves across the map, ensuring that London isn't the only place that feels like it actually has momentum.
And getting that regional momentum going requires a totally different approach to power. Instead of this suffocating centralized machine trying to micromanage everything from the top down, a real system fixer pushes for real decentralization. It means giving local regions the actual money, tools, and authority they need to solve their own problems. The central government should be setting the direction, not suffocating the creativity and agility of the regions beneath it.
Of course, none of this happens in a vacuum. There will be friction. So let's transition to phase 3, navigating pushback and risk.
Now, what's really interesting here is that the ultimate internal battle almost always starts with the Treasury. The traditional mindset views every single reform as an immediate cost, period. But a system-fixing PM has to force a shift. They need the Treasury to view these investments as productivity engine repairs. Better planning unlocks growth, better care reduces hospital pressure. But here's the catch. These gains emerge over years, not within a single convenient budget cycle. The PM must have the sheer nerve to invest in the country's architecture long before they get any public applause for it.
And the pushback wouldn't just be financial either. The source text highlights a really harsh reality of governance with this quote. Every system has beneficiaries, and beneficiaries rarely surrender quietly. Simplifying a broken system inevitably angers the people who have basically built their entire careers on delay, or those institutions that profit from complexity. When you cut through the inertia, you are absolutely guaranteed to make enemies.
And that resistance often disguises itself. The source calls this the backlash camouflage. You'd start hearing complaints like, he's centralizing too much, or he's moving too fast, he's disrespecting tradition, or he's ignoring nuance. While some of this criticism might be totally sincere, a lot of it just acts as a shield to protect the old way of doing absolutely nothing. To survive this, the PM has to strike a really delicate balance, being a highly competent manager who can explain hard trade-offs, while also being a visionary who shows urgent, visible momentum. But if the PM can actually survive that backlash and keep that visible momentum going, we enter the final stage. Phase 4, the collapse of cynicism. It all starts with what we can call the economic release. Just look at how these steps naturally build on each other. When systemic friction drops, because forms are simpler, transport works, planning is easier, household and business confidence naturally returns. People literally stop bracing for disappointment. This doesn't necessarily create a flashy overnight economic boom. Instead, it creates something better, steady economic growth. Because families and firms finally feel they can spend, hire, build, and plan with far less fear. The whole country just feels less stuck. Which brings us to a genuinely fascinating definition. In this alternate timeline, competence becomes a revolutionary political weapon. It completely destroys the public's reflex of expecting dysfunction. And frankly, this would be a terrifying force for any political opposition. Why? Because once voters actually see that the machine can be repaired, they completely stop rewarding politicians who merely perform theatrical grievance or outrage. Parties are suddenly forced to deliver actual, practical results. Imagine that. This transformation also heavily impacts the internal culture of the state. Whitehall has to shift from being this dense, bureaucratic maze into a machine designed for solving problems. That means valuing actual outcomes over bureaucratic ritual. The text points out a great secret of governance, right here. Achieving real results usually depends way less on heroic individuals and much more on having a system that actively helps, rather than hinders, ordinary, competent people who are just trying to do their jobs. If all of this were to happen, this British era of reform would quickly become a global case study. As this powerful quote from our source says, institutional decline is not destiny. It is a choice, or at least the product of accumulated choices. It would prove to the world that a country doesn't have to be trapped in eternal dysfunction. If the choices that led to decline can be changed, it means any nation is entirely capable of rebuilding its own machinery. The future is never locked in place. And that brings us to the end of our thought experiment, leaving us with one final, absolutely crucial question. If institutional decline is indeed a choice, which broken system would you choose to fix first? Whether it's healthcare, housing, transport, or something else entirely, think about the machinery that impacts your daily life. Fixing the system isn't about one lucky policy. It's about rebuilding the core relationship between the citizen and the state. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this leaves you looking at the systems around you in a whole new light.